baseball is interesting because it's the only major sport in which we have to stop playing it sometimes. I mean, I can't think of a football game that's ever like, they're like, no, we have to suspend the game. The weather's not nice enough.
I guess they have lightning strikes in a football game. They might delay it.
They might delay it, but they've never had to cancel a game and play it another night. That
certainly doesn't happen like baseball games.
No. Where it's like a regular thing that happens throughout the season. And so, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about today, which is sort of the oddity that is baseball rainouts, suspensions, forfeits, though forfeits are not that common, though they have happened within the last 30 or so years.
Yeah, there's well, let's start with that. But we'll talk about forfeits, but I want to talk about a suspended a game that was rained out. And the reason I wanted to do this episode because when I was 9 or 10 years old, I hit a home run in Little League. It's the only home run I ever hit in Little League. It didn't go out of the park or anything like that because I was a
It's not a home run, then.
Yeah, when I rolled all the way past the right fielder, went to the fence, and I run around the bases, and I scored the run. I was so excited, and then it rained, and the game got rained out, and the home run didn't count. I'm still ticked off about the Little League home run that didn't count.
Really?
Anyway, I just remember it more than anything else. So It made me think about, stats that don't count and games that are suspended or forfeits and stuff like that.
And like we said, so there is an interesting sort of quirk here that because of what used to happen before the rules were changed in the pandemic season is that when a game was rained out before the completion of the fifth, I think it's the fifth.
4.5 innings is
the 4.5 innings. So the top half of the fifth inning. If the game was rained out before that, the game was all the records from that game were struck. And the game was made up and started again from the top of the first. And so this created a weird thing where if you were a player and you hit a home run in one of those first 4.5, innings or so, it just didn't count.
And so it was the pandemic where they said, you know what? We don't want the players to have to spend any more time on the field with each other than they need to. Okay, you gotta just start with that for a second. That was the rationale.
Right. I think that was I think what that's called is we don't want to have to play any makeup games.
And so basically, if there was a rained out game, they would pick it up from the suspended point, and that rule never went back to the way that it was before.
Right. And it's so much better this way. I don't know anybody that would disagree that like somehow replaying the entire game was a more pure experience or something.
Yeah, I just I could never understand how the stats didn't count. Like that's
the
that's
stats
crazy.
Not counting makes sense to me because you can't have free floating stats. You can't have a game that
the stats didn't lead to an outcome.
Right, that's the problem. So you have to get rid of those unless the game is continued. And so the complaint should not be that the stats didn't count, but that they didn't continue the games back then.
And maybe it was when you think about the way baseball was, and it was okay. Well, we're gonna just to bring the teams back at another date. I don't want to only play 5 innings or 7 innings. People came all the way to watch this game and paid admission to this game.
They're going to want to get a full game.
Whole 9-inning game, and I'm assuming that had something to do with why they decided to replay the game in its entirety.
Sure that the majority of the game being the majority of the money being made on the ticket sales and the people attending the game rather than on broadcast probably also influenced that as well. It was much more profitable to play a whole nother game.
It's the only thing I can think of because you get a rainout ticket. Now the way they give you rainout tickets is you don't have to go to the game when it's replayed. That particular game, you can go to any game where there's an open seat for it. So it's not like you're married to that particular game.
Right.
So at least that's the case. But now we go back, and what they probably would do today is, let's say a game is suspended in the 3rd inning, and they'll just pick that game up, and then they'll play it kind of like a doubleheader, and they'll break between the games, and then they'll play the regularly scheduled games so the teams don't have to travel or do anything different, and the fans kind of get a 2-for-1 maybe in that situation.
Right, usually, depending
which doesn't happen anymore because we don't have double headers anymore.
Well, we only really get double headers rarely whenever there is a rainout.
Right. When they have to, right? Have a double header,
Right, they don't just schedule.
They don't schedule double headers. In fact, there are no scheduled double headers at all in the major leagues.
Which makes sense
anymore because the owners and everybody want the gates for 162 games.
And the players probably prefer it. I think if you're a player, you prefer not to play a double header.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting point. I assume so. I never really thought about
they're not particularly fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess so.
Maybe it's different if you're not a pitcher.
I think, and today's players certainly, because double headers allowed guys that don't get to play a lot of times to get a chance to play.
Right.
And I think today's players probably are more happy that get a game out of the way as opposed to have to come back and play it at another time.
That is probably true.
So I don't know. I think you'd have to ask some players if that's what it is. So there's been only. Well, let's go back to the forfeits because you started with that.
Well, no, I mean, we could kind of go anywhere we want to go with this. So, I mean, if we want to talk about the forfeit, so what I thought was interesting is I very confidently before the show said, I don't ever remember a forfeit in my lifetime. And actually, there was one in 95.
Yeah, and the circumstances of that. Well, there's only been 5, which
right. But the fact that one happened in 95, but as soon as you hear the story behind the one in 95, and really all of them, it's kind of all the same thing, and it wasn't anything that was done by the players in the game causing the forfeit most of the time.
I think, and in addition to the 95 one, the forfeit that always comes right to mind is Disco Demolition Night.
We were going to start with the 95 one.
Right.
So this was a Dodgers-Cardinal game.
So
and the Dodgers, in their infinite wisdom, and something that's no longer allowed now, decided to do a promotional baseball giveaway to their fans. And so when we reached the top or bottom of the ninth,
in the 7th inning,
the 7th inning,
the fans decided they're going to start throwing baseballs on the field
in protest of what was going on.
So, and again, in the bottom of the 9th inning, the Cardinals are leading 2-1.
Yep.
And one of the batters gets called out in strikes and ejected by the home plate umpire.
Raul Mondesi.
Right. Mondesi gets thrown out, and then Tommy Lasorda comes out. He gets thrown out, by Jim Quick.
And then the fans throw out the baseballs.
And the Cardinals left the field due to safety concerns, which, you don't want people pegging baseballs from the stands at you.
The L.A. Dodger fans decided that they were going to be Philadelphia fans for the evening.
So the Cardinals returned to the field. What do the Dodgers fans do?
They
threw more balls at them.
And I'm impressed they had some left at that point. So do you think they were hassling other fans that had
Give me your ball.
Yeah.
Give me your ball. And so the umpires then decided that they had to forfeit the game to St. Louis. And then the MLB, in its infinite wisdom, decided that if you're ever going to have a game, we're going to give away a projectile to somebody like a Frisbee or a ball.
You give it out after the game.
Give it out after the game. Yeah. MLB. It takes a while for them to get it, but they got it right there. So that was the most recent.
Right.
And I don't really remember, anything specifically about that particular game. We mentioned in 1979, Disco Demolition Night, and we've had that conversation before.
Right, which is just, as soon as you hear, it was like, bring all your stuff and we'll blow it up. And yeah, obviously that's not going to go well.
And what always amazed me is that they were shocked when they blew up the disco records in the center field between the games of the doubleheader, that it left this big burnt spot out there. Like, what did they think was going to happen?
Yeah, and they're like, it was you got in free or you got to drink for free.
I think it was 10-cent beers or something like that.
Right, which incidentally led to another one of the forfeits on this list.
Oh?
Well, because that's the Texas game, correct?
Right. That was 10-cent beer. I think it was 50-cent beer in Disco Demolition Night.
Right. So Texas had a 10-cent beer night, and this is just a wild story where the fans got drunk, got rowdy, and upset with the state of the game. They did the only logical thing that you can do: charge the field and try and fight the other team.
They attacked Texas outfielder Jeff Burrows when the score was tied 5-5 in the 9th inning. It wasn't like a 10-1 game or something like that. This is a
good game,
a tight game. And so the drunken rowdy fans arrived armed with an array of improvised weapons. Like, what is going on here? Basically, they threw chunks of stadium seating onto the field. They brawled with players and officials from both teams, as well as with umpires, who subsequently forfeited the game to Texas. And you know what the score of a forfeit is?
9-0.
9-0. So they give you 1 run for every inning of the game.
Right.
And I don't know that no stats come out of
that. But
it
doesn't mean anything because it's not like runs allowed or runs for count for anything.
There's no tiebreakers based on total
so
runs.
It doesn't really mean anything.
And they don't give any, it's like, we're going to give the 9 guys in the lineup all get home runs.
No, they don't do that.
That's not what they do.
All it is a team statistic that's meaningless.
And then the other... and then was the game where Earl
That's
Weaver...
only if the game is forfeited from the beginning of the game.
Right. And then was the Earl Weaver game in Toronto where they had tarps on the mounds and he wanted them to move them.
Right. What was why was he doing that? Was he trying to play some kind of game?
I think he actually thought that it was unsafe that if there was a fly ball down the left field line and then they had the mounds sort of on the foul territory there on the third base side, that as the guy ran over there, he'd run on this blue tarp and slip and fall and hurt himself.
So he decided to protest and he refused to play the game until the tarps were removed. The umps got one of them off there and then they were like, the other one doesn't matter. We're not putting it on. They were like, okay, Earl, you got to come back out here. After the Orioles didn't come back out, they're like, all right, game is forfeited.
It's a forfeit. That's it. The game was over.
Which makes sense. You have to have that option because you can't have a team basically be able to hold the game hostage in a sense.
But to pull your team off the field, I mean, there's been other incidences where you had to pull players off the field because it was unsafe, and they didn't have a forfeit.
Right, but that was him pulling off because he didn't like something. It was not unsafe.
And the only other one was the final game for the Washington Senators at RFK Stadium, where the home team was winning. Washington was winning. It's fine. They didn't win a lot of games, obviously, and they were mad about moving to Texas.
So they decided to keep them from doing so.
The spectators stormed the field, vandalized the stadium, and basically the security staff left the stadium, resulting in thousands of people walking in without paying, and the umpires forfeited the game to the Yankees.
I mean, it's just showing you that in RFK Stadium, even back then, they probably would have hated Dan Snyder.
I don't think he was around for that one.
I don't think he was alive yet.
But
they knew.
So when you talk about suspended games, we talk about the fact that there's been some weird things where a team had a lead at the bottom of the inning, and let's talk about that a little bit.
I think you were talking about before the episode that there was one guy that it was a game, top 7, tie game 1-1.
It was 2-1 for the home team.
It's 2-1 for the home team going into the top of the 7th. Guy comes up, hits a 2-runner home run. Now it's 3-2 in the top of the 7th. They complete the top of the 7th, but they don't complete the bottom of the 7th as it starts to rain, and the game is called. And so, because of that, the game is rolled back. This almost happened this year in the Mets game.
The Marlins game. Right.
And so the game is rolled back. The two-run home run in the top of the 7th doesn't count, and the game is rolled back to the end of the bottom of the 6th, which is 2-1, and the other team lost. It's like, think about the wildness of losing a game you were winning because it started raining, basically.
It happened in 1950, and oddly enough, the game itself was a makeup of a rainout.
And I think what's interesting is we had a prototype of what are the current suspension rules debuted for us in the 2008 World Series. Because in the 2008 World Series between the Phillies and the Rays, the Phillies are trying to close it out in Game 5, and it starts raining. And so they suspend the game. 2 days later, they pick it up and they play a back-and-forth classic that the Phillies end up winning to close out the World Series. But it was just a suspended game. They picked it up. They didn't restart and play a whole new game.
Right, and it's the only suspended game in World Series history.
And so a lot of it kind of goes back to why did it take Major League Baseball so long to get it right?
I just, at what point, did they think, like, after 50 years or 60 years of doing it this way, that, we should keep doing this way and just wipe out all those stats? You mentioned Babe Ruth supposedly having 716 home runs. Those baseball fans like me that know Al Kaline, right, and we know that he's a Hall of Fame guy, and he finished with 399 home runs, except that he really didn't, because there was a game in which he didn't hit one, but he hit 2 home runs in the first inning of a game, okay, and the game was rained out.
Now, I think the problem is that if you're going to be fair, you'd also have to look for guys that hit home runs in the first 4 innings of a makeup game that didn't hit them in the original rainout. Because you'd have to take those home runs away because that wasn't fair that they got those extra at-bats.
And your point is right that you didn't mandate. I guess if you had a suspended game, so if a pitcher had pitched or a player had played and come out of the game, he can't go back into the game.
If a guy batted in the first game, he was 0 for 2 with 2 strikeouts. Those don't count for him. He gets to come up in the next game with a whole fresh slate and hit a home run.
As if it never happened.
As if it never happened. So It's kind of interesting. It works both ways.
So there are certainly situations where guys, had a benefit to their,
obviously nothing huge. We're talking about over the course of Babe Ruth's entire career. It happened to him twice.
So if you go to, I like something called Retro Sheet. I don't know if you've looked in there too much and all this.
No,
stuff.
I haven't.
So there's a zillion going back to 1885 examples of what they call lost home runs, and they all kind of fall into this category of the game was rained out and the home runs didn't happen, and it's only the ones that sort of stick out, where Babe Ruth should have had 716 or Ralph Kiner would have won the home run crown, had he not had the home runs wiped out. That kind of stuff is interesting.
Didn't George Brett get one wiped out in the Pine Tar game?
That is absolutely the case. In fact, that is one of the more recent famous suspended games,
right?
The Pine Tar game, and that was played from where it picked up in the 9th inning.
Right, but he would have. His home run would have counted then.
Right. They said it was an illegal. They did count. I think they did end up counting the home run.
Right. Which is interesting to think about because the game, they suspended the game and then picked it up. They didn't replay the game.
Right. They picked it up from where from where it was, and I think that managers, when they see a rain out coming, it's really hard sometimes to think if it's really coming, do I want to start my pitcher or do I want to hold him back? And it's really hard to make a change, particularly if you're not sure. If it's gonna rain all night or whatnot,
right.
You hate to burn your number
one. You hate
one.
to burn a number one and then have him get rained after 4 innings and get knocked out. But I think that it kind of goes back to me that I guess to me it bugs me because baseball is the only sport where you have to deal with this. Basketball, you don't have rainouts. Football, they just play through. They don't stop playing for any reason. Now, I think you can make the argument that baseball is more affected by weather than football, though.
Absolutely.
The modern NFL looks pretty terrible when it's raining or snowing, I'm going to be admitted.
And soccer, they play in all kinds of weather, warm, cold,
but
rain,
again, it
whatnot.
affects the quality of the game when you're
It does.
playing in a cold, rainy night.
It does. It's not as good. But in baseball, you can't
The
play
game
certain.
grinds down to almost an unplayable halt.
And that's what happened in that game of the World Series you mentioned.
But
in
that kind of
2008.
goes to: do you think teams should all have retractable roofs?
Well, ideally, in a perfect world, 100% yes. So that just like what they did in tennis, right? When you don't have to worry anymore at the U.S. Open or any of the majors because they have retractable roofs, and you don't have to, you can't play the final on Sunday or something like that. You can always play the final.
Right,
you can always do
play
that
the
now.
final, and we don't have to worry about losing a game because it was raining.
But we can also agree that the impracticality of mandating that every team put in a retractable roof is not.
The Oakland Athletics
possible.
couldn't afford a stadium in Oakland. There's no way we could also mandate it needed to have a retractable roof.
And it doesn't. At least it doesn't rain that much there either.
Right.
So they don't have that problem. So yeah, I think ideally it would be good to not have this be a factor. It would be easier for the players. I think it would create better baseball because the thing you don't want more than anything else is to have Garrett Cole go out there and pitch 2 innings and have it pour, and now he's done for the next 5 days.
Right. Or you don't want a guy getting hurt in a game that didn't matter.
No,
or didn't count.
No, that it didn't count. They all. I guess in that respect, they all matter. So I think that the baseball finally, through basically necessity, made the changes.
They finally got it right.
Yeah.
I think now.
But it wasn't by design. It was kind of like
backed into it, and I can only think that it was part of the reason why they didn't change it before. Now it was just the way they'd always done it.
Yeah, and that all those stats didn't count, and it just amazes me that they could do it for all those years. Going, yeah, well, it's not a big deal. That the stats
part of
don't
me
count.
does feel like we kind of there's a little too much on that because it's that's the rules. Like I understand that it's not fair in a sense that they did hit that home run and that it doesn't.
Right, that's my point. My point is that you made this accomplishment in competition that was legitimate competition, and then that competition basically is, well, it doesn't count because the rule that we have is if you don't get to play this many innings, all that stuff never really happened. What never really happened? So they live with it, and nobody went said, excuse me,
Well,
this is stupid.
Right. You as a player want to take that fight?
I would have thought, well, players probably didn't. The players, they couldn't even get control of their own contract.
Exactly. So that's why nobody
let's have that.
And it's such a small thing that affects such a few percentage of guys that you probably just threw up your shoulders and go, that's just the way it is.
I have 2 words as to how it would have been different had this happened, 50 or 60 years ago. The 2 words are Scott Boras. So if Scott Boras were around and he was an agent back in the 50s and 60s, and some of his players had their stats, sort of attenuated,
But you know what? He was an agent throughout the 90s and 2000s, and he didn't get it changed. It took the COVID year to get that changed.
I just think that the groundswell of having guys like that and more guys like Boras going, this is crazy. My player's not getting credit for what he did. It's not even in the records. He hit that home run. But Dave Winfield hit a home run off Nolan Ryan. But no, he didn't because it didn't count.
It was a rainout.
But when he sat there and he hit the ball, right? He stood at the plate and he hit the ball, went over the fence. He ran around the bases. Right?
Batting practice home runs don't count.
It's not a batting practice home run. It's a home run off Nolan Ryan in competition.
Not in an official game.
It was not an official game. So thank goodness for baseball getting that right. We don't have to deal with that kind of stuff anymore. No. And so that from here on out, we'll have suspended games. I don't know that we'll have too many forfeits because I don't know.
Forfeits are only going to come.
It's hard to imagine how it could happen today.
An extraordinary circumstance.
Power failure at the game wouldn't be a forfeit. That would be a
suspension.
suspended game.
Fans would have to do something. They would have to charge the field. There would have to be some kind of unprecedented attack, like batter, like legitimately assaults a guy with a bat or something,
That happened in a game.
but like a crazy degree or something. Like there would have to be something that would basically force the stoppage of play because of one team or their fans.
And so much of that, right, had to do with you could actually get on the field.
And now you just can't.
And now you can. I mean, I've told the story when I was a kid. I got on the field, and I think about that going, I can't imagine it now. Like getting on a
Well, a
major
guy got
league
on the field last year.
Yeah.
It happened a few times.
But they don't show him now.
No, and it's not like fans plural. It's one or two crazy people, not dozens of them.
Back in the 70s, they would have guys go on there, and this didn't cause a suspended game or a forfeit, but they would streak on the field.
Right. I'm saying
I never understood that.
You had a
by the
bad
way.
enough incident like that could cause a forfeit. But I think we'll mostly just see suspensions from now
Mostly
on.
suspensions. We have a better game, that.
Oh, yeah.
And there's too much at stake, that these players, are being paid too much. It's an entertainment product. It's professional. We can't have forfeits and stuff like that happen. So I think the players know that, and the management knows that. And I don't see anything happening unless, like you said, something unforeseen.
Let's get rid of the rainouts, though.
Unless you get rid of, yeah. That would be good. We need dome stadiums for that.